Why did her hands remember what her mind had spent years trying to forget? The old M24 sniper rifle lay across the bench like a relic pulled from another lifetime. Its stock was, the barrel dulled by years of neglect. To anyone else, it was nothing more than another piece of outdated equipment waiting for decommission. But to Erin, the feel of its cold steel was enough to ignite instincts she had buried so deep she sometimes believed they were gone. The way her fingers moved across the wood and metal, steady, deliberate, reverent, it betrayed something no personnel file could ever capture. She shouldn't have touched it. She knew that the moment her hands closed around the weapon. For 17 days she had walked past it, cataloged around it, pretended it wasn't there. But that afternoon, with the armory unusually quiet and the pale Alaskan sun bleeding in through narrow windows, the rifle called to her like an echo from a grave. And she answered. Erin wasn't supposed to exist anymore, not as who she had once been. She was a supply clerk now, anonymous and efficient, hidden in the endless bureaucracy of Fort Richardson. To the men and women who came through the armory she was forgettable, brown hair pulled back, uniform pressed to regulation, movements neat but unremarkable. She existed in the background, doing work that mattered but drew no notice. That was how she had survived. 3 years of invisibility. 3 years of cataloging and cleaning, updating logs, double-checking serial numbers, pretending the only battles she fought were against dust and paperwork. It had become almost believable. Almost. Until the rifle. She disassembled it with the ease of ritual, each piece laid out in order on the workbench. The smell of solvent and oil filled her lungs, dragging memories from the shadows. Wind on her cheek, dust in her eyes, the world narrowed to a crosshair and a heartbeat. The sound of a spotter's whisper, "Adjust 2 clicks right, send it." The recoil, the silence, the knowledge that someone's world had just ended without ever knowing she was there. Her pulse quickened, but her hands never trembled. She moved like a woman who had done this 10,000 times because she had. Every motion was muscle memory carved into her bones, the kind of memory you don't lose, no matter how badly you want to. And that was when she heard them. Boots, 2 sets, one quick, careless, the other slower, heavier, deliberate, the kind of step that belonged to someone used to command. Erin didn't look up. She didn't need to. She had trained herself to recognize footsteps, to catalog rhythm and wait the same way she read wind and distance. The first belonged to Lieutenant, the overeager officer who loved turning the armory into his personal museum tour. The second voice she hadn't heard before, but she felt it before he spoke, the gravity in the air when authority walked into a room. "Is that an M24? The voice was older, rougher, carved by years of service in places where orders weren't suggestions but survival. "Yes, sir," chirped, clearly pleased to have an audience. Old system, but still effective. Clerk was just giving it a routine cleaning before decommission. Erin's pulse thudded once in her ears, but her movements remained calm, measured. She ran the cleaning rod one last time through the barrel, set it aside, and reached for the stock. Her fingertips brushed across the wood that carried the scar she should have sanded down years ago. "Mind if I take a look?" He was close now. She could smell coffee on his breath, faint traces of cigar smoke clinging to his uniform. She finally looked up. Silver hair, sharp brown eyes, the weight of eagles on his collar. Colonel Hayes. Erin kept her voice neutral. "Of course, sir." She handed him the weapon. The colonel's hands moved with the precision of someone who had carried rifles longer than she had been alive. Chamber check. Safety. Balance. His eyes traced the weapon the way a man studies a photograph of a face he half remembers. "This one's seen some action," he murmured almost to himself. "The wear's unusual." Erin's throat tightened. She forced her voice steady. "It came in tagged from Afghanistan, sir. Probably line unit use. Records are a bit mixed." But Hayes wasn't listening to her words. His thumb was running along the stock, feeling for something. And then it stopped. Erin saw the exact moment it happened. His eyes sharpened. Casual curiosity hardened into something else: recognition. His thumb pressed against the wood where the faint, burned symbol lay, hidden to untrained eyes. A stylized eye surrounded by crosshairs. The mark of a unit that didn't exist. The Deadeye division. Erin's breath caught before she forced it steady. She kept her expression blank, the way she had been trained. But inside, everything shifted, because the colonel wasn't just looking at a rifle. He was looking at her. Hayes's gaze lifted slowly, meeting hers. There was no accusation in his eyes, but there was no innocence either. Calculation, memory, and something else: respect maybe, or warning. "Where did you say this rifle came from?" His voice was controlled, calm, but she heard the undertone. "Overseas, sir. Afghanistan. Paperwork's not always reliable." "Yes," he said softly, still studying her face. "Records do get mixed up." Oblivious filled the silence. "Clerk Locke keeps everything running smoothly. Best in the division, sir. She knows these weapons better than anyone." The colonel didn't answer. His eyes never left Erin's, and for the first time in 3 years she felt seen, truly seen. The rifle was returned to her hands, but the weight of it was different now. Heavy, not with steel but with memory and exposure. She reassembled it with calm precision, though her mind raced with contingencies. He had recognized the mark. That much was certain. The only question was what he would do with that knowledge. The colonel lingered a moment longer, then said, "Carry on, clerk. Excellent work." She came to attention, crisp, practiced. Her salute was flawless, too flawless. She saw it in his eyes as he turned away. He knew, or at least he suspected. Their footsteps faded, but Erin's heart did not slow. She set the rifle down and continued with mechanical tasks, but the damage was already done. 3 years of careful anonymity cracked in a single glance. By evening the armory was quiet again. Soldiers checked out and returned their weapons. She filed the logs, locked the cages. Everything was by the book, everything looked normal, but inside she was unraveling. That night in her Spartan quarters she pulled the loose board in the closet. The go bag waited there. Cash, false IDs, a few personal relics. Insurance for the day she always knew might come. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers brushing the zipper. She could leave tonight, slip away into the dark, vanish again. But she didn't. Because the colonel hadn't had her arrested. He hadn't called for security or demanded answers. He had spoken carefully, neutrally, as if this was a game of patience, as if he was waiting to see what she would do next. And that frightened her more than anything. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the bag, and felt the ghost stir. Sarah, Camus, David, faces she hadn't allowed herself to see in years. Her team, her family, all gone in that valley, betrayed and buried under silence. The army said helicopter crash, closed caskets, folded flags, but she knew the truth. She had lived it. And now the truth was staring back at her through the eyes of Colonel Hayes. Sleep never came. Every creak of the building, every passing step in the hall kept her awake, because the question that had haunted her since the ambush returned with a vengeance. Who betrayed them? And why, after 3 years of silence, was the answer suddenly circling closer again? Who leaves an envelope on a soldier's door in the middle of the night? Erin stared at the plain paper in her hands, her name written in neat block letters. The young enlisted courier had looked barely old enough to shave, his salute nervous, his voice formal. Delivery for supply clerk. And then he was gone. No explanation, no signature, no attempt to hide what it was. Inside, she already knew, was something that would change everything. She shut her door softly, her reflexes kicking in before she even realized it. Desk angled toward the door, line of sight to the window, body positioned between exits. Years of pretending to be someone else couldn't erase the instincts of who she had been. The first page was simple enough. An order to report to Colonel Hayes's office at 800. Standard language, nothing threatening. She could almost convince herself it was routine. Almost. The second page stole the breath from her chest. It was a photograph, grainy, long distance, but unmistakable. 4 figures in operational gear, heads bent over a map. Her team. Sarah, Camus, David, taken 3 days before they died. She turned the photo over, but there was nothing else on the back. Just that frozen moment, proof that someone had been watching them. The third page was worse. A roster, names, service records, all of Deadeye Division, a unit that had officially never existed, and next to her own name in red pen, location confirmed, recommend immediate contact. Her hands trembled. She had spent 3 years burying herself in routine, pretending her past was gone. But someone knew. Someone had been watching her all along. The smart move was to run. That was what the go bag in her closet was for. Slip into the dark, vanish into another life. Leave Fort Richardson, leave Aaron, become someone new. She could disappear again just like she had before. But she didn't move. Instead, she sat at her desk, staring at the papers as if they might explain themselves. Why hadn't Hayes simply arrested her? Why hadn't the photograph been used as evidence to end her cover in a single blow? Why summon her formally instead of pulling her into an interrogation room under guard? Because he wanted something, and whatever it wasn't her imprisonment. The clock dragged her toward morning. She didn't sleep. She didn't even try. She sat in uniform long before dawn, her cover perfect, her demeanor calm. But beneath the pressed fabric and polished boots, her mind spun through every possible scenario. By the time she walked into the administrative building, she was already rehearsing answers she might need. Her file was solid, professionally constructed, deep enough to survive scrutiny, but not unbreakable. She could admit just enough truth to buy time, or deny everything until she knew what he really wanted. The secretary at Hayes's office didn't smile. He didn't need to. Men like him had screened visitors long enough to know when a file didn't tell the full story. "The colonel will see you shortly," he said. She waited in silence, counting seconds, mapping exits. Finally, the door opened. "He'll see you now." Colonel Hayes's office was nothing extraordinary: government desk, regulation decorations, the kind of bland efficiency that said nothing about the man who worked there. But Hayes himself was anything but bland. He didn't stand when she entered. He didn't extend a hand. He just studied her, eyes sharp, unreadable. "Close the door." She did. "You received my message." "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady, professional. "Though I'm not entirely sure what you're looking for from me." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "What I'm looking for, clerk, is honesty, the kind that doesn't fit neatly into a personnel file." Her breath slowed. This was it. No more skirting around it. "I'm exactly who my file says I am, sir." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He pulled a folder from his desk, thick, heavier than any standard record. He opened it and flipped through pages deliberately, letting the silence stretch. "Your file says you were born in Denver, basic training at Fort Wood, assigned to supply duties because you had an aptitude for detail. Neat, complete, and absolutely false." He slid the folder across the desk. "Take a look at what I actually know about you." Erin's pulse pounded in her ears. She opened the file and froze. Training records, specialized schools that didn't exist on any public rosters, mission summaries from operations that officially never happened, evaluations written in the clipped language of special operations circles, and photographs, dozens of them, her in full kit, her with her team, her sighting down a rifle at distances that belief. It was her life, the life she had buried, documented in black and white. "How?" she whispered. "Trade secret," Hayes said. For the first time, there was a ghost of amusement in his eyes. "But death certificates can be remarkably flexible, don't you think?" Her chest tightened. If her death had been staged, if her new identity had been arranged, then someone had been protecting her this entire time. Someone with resources. And if they had kept her safe, why reveal themselves now? "What do you want from me?" she asked. "What I want," Hayes said, leaning forward, "is to offer you the chance to finish what your team started." The words hit harder than any bullet. Her throat closed, she forced herself to speak. "My team is dead. The mission died with them." "Your team is dead," Hayes agreed. "But the mission was never completed, and the people responsible for their deaths are still alive, still operating, still killing soldiers who don't even know they've been betrayed." Erin shook her head. "The investigation was closed. There was nothing actionable." "The official investigation was closed," Hayes interrupted. "But others have been working quietly, following trails, building cases, identifying targets, for 3 years." She swallowed. "Not me. I'm not that person anymore. I've been out of the field too long." Hayes's voice softened. "Your skills don't rust. They wait. And the way you cleaned that rifle yesterday told me everything I need to know." Her eyes flicked to the folder again, her past laid bare, the ghosts pressing in. "If I wanted you detained," Hayes continued, "you'd already be gone, but I didn't, because I believe you're the only one who can do this. You were there, you saw it happen, you understand the cost." Erin's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why me?" "Because as far as they're concerned, you're dead. That makes you invisible, untouchable, and dangerous in a way they'll never see coming." The silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. She stared at the photograph on top of the pile, her team, alive, caught mid-laughter in a dusty Afghan camp. She felt the burn of tears she refused to shed. Hayes let her look for a moment before speaking again. "I won't force you, but if you want answers, if you want justice, you'll be at a briefing this afternoon. You'll see everything we've uncovered, and then you'll decide." He slid a slip of paper across the desk. "A time, a location, nothing else." Erin picked it up. Her fingers didn't shake this time. 1400 hours, Hayes said quietly. "If you walk away, no one will stop you, but something tells me you won't." She stood slowly, her body moving like it remembered how to carry weight. She gave him a crisp salute. "Sir." As she turned for the door, his final words followed her. "You've been running from who you are for 3 years, but the truth has a way of finding you. Sooner or later, it always does." Outside, the air was sharp, clean, almost painfully bright. Erin folded the slip of paper into her palm, gripping it like a lifeline. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt something stir inside her that she had thought long dead. Purpose. How do you face ghosts when they're standing in front of you? The slip of paper in Erin's palm had felt heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. A time, a set of coordinates, nothing else. No insignia, no explanation, just an invitation into something she couldn't yet define. She had stared at it for hours, turning the decision over like a round in a chamber. She could walk away, pretend none of it had happened, but deep down she knew that wasn't true. By 1300 hours she had signed out of the base for personal business. A lie, neat and routine, slipped into the paperwork as easily as breathing. She drove north, past the city, toward the mountains. The roads thinned, the houses grew fewer, and the silence pressed harder against the windows of her car. Every mile deepened her doubt. Was she walking into a trap, into custody, into a bullet? Her eyes traced every reflection in the mirrors, cataloged every car behind her, every vehicle parked along the road. She couldn't tell if the heightened awareness was instinct or paranoia. Both, maybe. 3 years of quiet living hadn't dulled her senses. It had only made them hungrier. The coordinates led to a cabin tucked into the tree line. At first glance, it was the kind of place civilians used for hunting weekends or fishing trips. But the vehicles outside told another story. Government sedans, unremarkable rentals, the kind of camouflage used by professionals who wanted to blend in rather than disappear. Erin didn't get out right away. She sat in the driver's seat, hands loose on the wheel, eyes scanning. Two figures appeared near the cabin, moving with the easy alertness of trained operators. Not military uniforms, but their posture gave them away. They didn't approach. They didn't need to. Their very presence said, "We've seen you and we're watching." She took a slow breath and stepped out of the car. Her boots crunched against gravel. The air smelled of pine and snowmelt. Every nerve in her body told her to be ready for anything. Inside, the cabin was warm, wood-paneled, decorated with the kind of generic landscapes that came with rental property. But Aaron barely noticed, because the people in the room did not belong to any fishing trip. Colonel Hayes stood near the center, more relaxed now in civilian clothes but no less in command. Around him, men and women she didn't recognize, operators, analysts, shadows in civilian skin. But her eyes caught on a movement in the far corner, and her heart stopped. "Hello, Alex." Her name, not the one in her file, not the one on her uniform, the real one, spoken in a voice she hadn't heard in 3 years but knew as well as her own. She turned. Her spotter, older, harder, but unmistakably alive. Her chest tightened as if the air had been ripped from her lungs. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Behind him, Sarah stepped from a doorway carrying mugs of coffee. Her dark eyes widened, her expression raw with something between hope and guilt. And leaning against the far wall was Camus, arms crossed, steady, the medic who had patched them all back together more times than she could count. Aaron's voice cracked before she could stop it. "You're dead." The words were broken, fragile, pulled from the wreckage of 3 years of grief. His mouth curved into a small, weary grin. "So are you, at least on paper." Her legs nearly gave out. She gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. She wanted to run to them, to hold them, to curse them, to scream. But all that came out was a whisper. Why? The question wasn't just about them being alive. It was about everything. Why had she been left alone to mourn them? Why had she spent 3 years believing she was the only one? Why exile her into silence while they lived in shadow? It was Sarah who answered, her voice careful, steady. "Because we couldn't be sure who betrayed us. The ambush came from inside our own command. Until we knew who was clean, we couldn't risk exposure, even to each other." Erin shook her head slowly, the disbelief sharp as pain. 3 years. 3 years I thought I was the last one, that it was my fault, that I was the one who lived when all of you. Her voice broke. Camus stepped forward, his eyes soft despite the stern lines of his face. "You survived because David covered you, because that was the call he made. Don't cheapen his choice by carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you." David. The name was a blade slicing through her composure. She hadn't spoken it in years. Couldn't. Their leader, the man who had pulled them together, kept them alive, and finally died buying her a chance to escape. The silence that followed was unbearable. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. She wouldn't let them see her break. Finally spoke again. 3 years, Aaron. While you were hiding in plain sight, we were building cases, tracking money, following trails. And now," he glanced at Hayes, then back at her, "now it's time to finish what we started." Aaron dropped into a chair, her body moving before her mind caught up. She exhaled shakily. "Show me." Hayes nodded once. A briefcase was opened on the table, spilling files, photographs, and documents across the wood. Lines of red string might as well have been drawn across continents, faces of contractors, defense officials, political appointees. Aaron leaned forward. Her heart still pounded from the shock of seeing her team alive, but her mind, her operative's mind, snapped back into place. The pattern emerged quickly. She recognized some of the names. She had seen them whispered in briefings, connected to contracts, linked to decisions that had seemed strange at the time. Hayes's voice was even. The ambush wasn't an isolated betrayal. It was part of a network. Intelligence leaks sold for money, missions compromised, units destroyed, 17 confirmed teams, likely more. Sarah added, Every time the investigation is buried, files sealed, blame redirected. They've been doing this for years. Aaron stared at the photographs. High-ranking men and women smiling in suits, shaking hands at podiums. Faces that projected respectability while blood stained their ledgers. How many dead? Her voice was low. Too many, Hayes said. The weight of it settled over her like a shroud. This wasn't just about her team anymore. It was bigger, broader, a rot spreading through the very system that had trained and trusted them. And in that moment, Erin understood something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 3 years. Rage. Her eyes lifted from the files. What do you need from me? Precision, said simply. Some of these people are protected, too public to prosecute, too shielded for conventional operations, but not beyond reach, not for someone like you. Erin's mouth was dry. She knew exactly what he meant. Not arrests, not trials, elimination, clean, quiet, final. Hayes didn't soften it. This isn't vengeance, this is justice, for your team, for every team. But's eyes told the truth. It was both. The room waited for her answer, but Erin said nothing. Not yet. She leaned back in the chair, her gaze distant, seeing again that valley in Afghanistan, the screams, the gunfire, the smell of blood and cordite, the betrayal, the silence that followed. For 3 years she had tried to bury it, pretend she was someone else. But sitting in that cabin, surrounded by the teammates she thought were lost forever, staring at the faces of the men and women who had sold them out, she knew the truth. That part of her had never died. It had just been waiting. She exhaled once steady. When do we start? The answer came not from Hayes, but from. His grin was small, grim, and familiar. We already have. How do you speak to people you've already buried? The cabin had grown quiet after Hayes's declaration, but the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged, as if the air itself held its breath. The others drifted into smaller groups, reviewing files, checking weapons cases, murmuring low conversations. But Erin sat still, her eyes on the rough wood grain of the table, afraid that if she looked up again, they'd vanish. Was the first to break the silence. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat, folding his arms across the table, his movements casual, familiar. Too familiar. You're staring like you've seen a ghost, he said softly. Her eyes flicked to his face. The years showed deeper lines around his mouth, a shadow of gray in his hair. But it was him. The same calm steadiness, the same sharpness in his eyes that once read wind and distance better than any instrument. I have, she whispered. Leaned back, studying her. We thought you were gone, too. When we didn't see you after the valley, his voice caught just for a second before he masked it. We thought you were with David. David. His name was a blade cutting through her again. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 3 years. Couldn't bring herself to say it. I watched him die, Erin said, her voice flat. He gave me a chance to get out. I ran, and I kept running. Her hand tightened into a fist on the table. She hadn't meant to sound defensive, but shame bled into every word. Shook his head firmly. He chose, that was his call, you know it, and you honored it the only way you could, by living. She wanted to believe him, but the guilt was a shadow that had never left. Before she could respond, Sarah joined them, setting a steaming mug of coffee in front of Erin. Her eyes, always sharp, were softer now, searching. You look thinner, Sarah said gently. Different, but still you. Erin wrapped her hands around the mug, though she didn't drink. 3 years of pretending to be invisible will do that. You weren't pretending, Sarah said quietly. You were surviving. Erin looked at her then, really looked. The calm specialist who had once been the team's voice across continents. Sarah had always been analytical, precise, but behind her careful exterior had been warmth, humor, the ability to pull the sharp edges off their missions. Now, there was something harder in her face, a steel that hadn't been there before. You should have told me, Erin said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. They weren't accusation, but they weren't free of it either. You should have let me know I wasn't alone. Sarah lowered her eyes. We wanted to. God, we wanted to, but the leak was too deep. We couldn't risk it, not until we knew who we could trust. And by then, she trailed off, her fingers tightening around her own mug. It was easier to let me drown in it. Aaron's voice cracked, sharper now. Camus appeared then, leaning against the edge of the table. His presence was steady, grounding. He had always been the medic with a dry wit and unshakable calm, patching wounds and morale with equal skill. You think you were the only one suffering, he said gently. We buried you, Aaron. We mourned you. Every day for 3 years I carried the weight that I couldn't keep you alive. The silence cut both ways. Aaron blinked hard. Her vision blurred for a second before she forced it back into focus. She wanted to argue, to push back, but she couldn't, because he was right. The silence stretched, finally spoke again, quieter this time. We're here now, that's what matters. Aaron looked at him, then at Sarah, then at Camus. Her teammates, her family, alive. The grief she had carried alone cracked under the weight of that truth, and in its place came something else, anger. Not at them, not anymore, but at the people who had stolen those years, who had sold them out and left them all for dead. Hayes cleared his throat, pulling her back to the present. We've all lost something to this betrayal. Families, friends, teams. But loss without purpose is just tragedy. What we're building here is the alternative. He spread more documents across the table, and the briefing began. Maps, financial trails, communications intercepts, faces printed on grainy surveillance stills, each detail peeled back a layer of rot, contracts diverted, operations exposed, missions compromised before they even began. Sarah spoke first, her voice clinical. 17 teams confirmed compromised, possibly more. The pattern is consistent. Someone inside feeds intel to hostile groups. The teams are ambushed or disappear. The investigations are killed before they can breathe. Aaron's throat tightened. 17. That was 17 valleys, 17 nights like hers, 17 teams who thought they were fighting for something bigger, only to be sold like assets on a balance sheet. Why? Aaron asked, though she knew. She had always known. Money, Sarah said bitterly. Always money, defense contracts, political favors, black accounts, the kind of corruption that doesn't just happen once, it's systemic. Camus added, and protected. These aren't just leaks. They're people with enough authority to bury investigations and make entire units vanish on paper. Pushed a folder toward Aaron, and they've been doing it long enough to believe they're untouchable. She opened the folder. A face stared back at her. A man she had seen once in a briefing overseas, smiling, shaking hands with generals. Clean suit, white teeth. The kind of respectable mask that hid blood underneath. Aaron closed the folder slowly. What do you need me to do? Hayes's eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. What you were born to do, precision. The kind that removes the cancer without damaging the body. Aaron felt the weight of his words, precision. A cleaner word for what it really was, killing. Quiet, clinical killing. The work she had once been exceptional at. The work that had made her a ghost in the eyes of enemies and allies alike. She thought of David again, of his last stand, of the betrayal that had left him to die, and she knew there was no question left to ask. Still, she forced herself to say it. I'll see the targets, I'll see the intelligence, but I won't move blind. You'll have everything, Hayes said. This is not about sending you alone into the dark, not this time. You'll have support, authorization, cover, but the precision, that's yours, only yours. Aaron's gaze lingered on her team. Sarah, Camus, alive, waiting, depending on her. And for the first time in years, she felt her pulse steady. Not with fear, not with grief, but with purpose. The mission wasn't just theirs anymore. It was hers again. What does the night feel like before you stop being someone else? Aaron sat alone in her quarters, the envelope from Hayes long gone but its weight still lingering. The fluorescent light above hummed, the same sound she had lived under for 3 years. It had always been a comfort before, the monotony of anonymity, the predictability of a life without danger. But tonight it sounded different. Loud, hollow, like a cage rattling. On her bed sat the go-bag. It had been waiting for this moment all along. Cash, IDs, passports, a survival kit for running, a reminder that her life had been built on the possibility of flight. But tonight, for the first time, she wasn't checking it to escape. She was checking it to prepare. She unzipped the bag and laid everything out. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, money sorted, documents, gear inspected. It was the same ritual she had practiced before every mission years ago, except this time she was alone. No double-checking optics. No Sarah cross-verifying comms. No Camus laying out med supplies with dark humor. Her fingers brushed against a small item at the bottom of the bag, a silver lighter, worn smooth. It had belonged to David, their team leader. She had carried it all this time, though she never smoked. She flipped it open, struck the wheel, watched the flame flicker and fade. For years it had been a weight in her pocket. Tonight it was fire. She set it on the table, staring at it. "You'd know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You'd have the plan, you'd say something that made it simple." But there was no answer, just silence. She leaned back in the chair and let her eyes close. For a moment, she let herself remember. The range at dawn, the smell of dust and gun oil. Calm voice reading wind shifts. Sarah laughing at some half-finished joke. Camus muttering about how he wasn't paid enough to babysit idiots who thought they were bulletproof. And David, always David. Quiet, steady, carrying the weight no one else could. The memory tightened around her chest. It was almost unbearable, sitting in a room that looked nothing like those nights and mornings, but carried their ghosts in every corner. 3 years of pretending had dulled her edges, but it hadn't killed her core. The truth was simple. She had been waiting for this moment, for a reason to stop hiding, for permission to stop being invisible. But the question that haunted her wasn't about readiness. It was about cost. Could she go back into the shadows knowing what it would mean? That this time, survival wasn't guaranteed, and that if she died, there would be no folded flag, no funeral, no recognition. Just silence. Just another name crossed off a roster that officially never existed. She opened her locker and stared at the uniforms hanging there. Supply clerk's greens, crisp and ordinary, the fabric of her false life. Tomorrow she would resign. Tomorrow Aaron would cease to exist. But tonight she was still both women, the clerk and the sniper, the invisible and the ghost. And she didn't know which one would wake up tomorrow. The clock ticked. Midnight passed. The silence pressed heavier. She couldn't sleep. Her body wouldn't allow it. Instead, she moved through her room like a soldier reacquainting herself with ritual. She stripped her weapon, a standard-issue pistol she'd barely used in 3 years, and cleaned it with the same reverence she had shown the M24. Her movements were steady, automatic. The sound of the slide, the click of the magazine, the wipe of the cloth, it was all muscle memory. She could almost hear saying, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." When she finished, she packed it back into the go-bag. Then she stood before the mirror. The reflection staring back was strange. Uniform neat, hair pinned tight, the face of a woman who had convinced the world she was nobody, but beneath the surface she could see the cracks, the sharpness in the eyes, the strength she had smothered. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Who are you?" The answer came in fragments: supply clerk, ghost, survivor, killer, betrayed, alive. The words didn't fit together, not yet, but tomorrow they would have to. She turned away from the mirror, the lighter still on the table. The flame burned into her vision even after it had gone out. She picked it up, closed it, and slid it into her pocket. The decision was already made. She wasn't running. She wasn't disappearing again. She was going back into the shadows, not to hide, but to finish what had been stolen from her. The rest of the night passed in silence. She sat by the window, watching the faint glow of the base, listening to the distant hum of trucks and generators, the ordinary rhythm of soldiers who had no idea what kind of war was being fought in the shadows around them. By dawn she was still awake. The light crept into the room, pale and cold, stretching across the floor. She stood, her body heavy but her mind clear. She dressed in uniform one last time, pulled her boots tight, tied her hair back, checked the bag, and then she sat on the edge of the bed, lighter in her hand, waiting for the knock that would change everything. It didn't come. Instead, at 700 she stood on her own and walked out the door. Each step felt like the final beat of a drum. Every soldier she passed greeted her with the casual nod of routine. None of them saw the truth. None of them knew that by sundown she would no longer exist. The administrative office was exactly as it always had been. Papers shuffled. Phones rang. People moved in and out without notice. She walked through it like a ghost, her resignation letter folded neatly in her pocket. When she reached the desk of the personnel officer, she slid the envelope forward. "Transfer of duties," she said simply. He nodded, barely glancing at it. "We'll process it." That was it. 3 years of a constructed life ended in a single signature. She walked out, her pulse steady, the go bag waiting in her car. The road ahead stretched toward the mountains, toward the coordinates Hayes had given her. And for the first time since that valley, since betrayal and blood and silence, Aaron felt the weight of choice lift. Because tomorrow no longer mattered. The past no longer mattered. All that mattered was the mission. What kind of war is it when the enemy wears your own uniform? The cabin was quieter this time. Fewer faces, but sharper ones. Men and women who didn't belong to any official roster, who carried themselves like operators but wore civilian clothes. The kind of people who moved in the gray spaces between acknowledgement and denial. Erin sat at the long wooden table, her go bag at her feet, her posture upright, her eyes steady. She had walked away from the supply clerk that morning. The woman who had spent 3 years cataloging rifles and filing logs was gone. What remained was something older, something truer. Colonel Hayes stood at the head of the table. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of what he was about to reveal. What you're about to see doesn't leave this room. Not because it's classified, but because the people we're hunting are the ones who decide what gets classified in the first place. He opened a briefcase and spread folders across the table. Dossiers. Thick, detailed, filled with faces, transcripts, numbers. Sarah leaned forward immediately, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she organized the files. "We've confirmed a network. Contractors, defense officials, even senior officers. It's not one leak. It's a chain. Information passed hand to hand, disguised as routine transfers, until it reaches people who sell it to hostiles. Added, every single compromised mission we've tracked runs through this network. 17 confirmed. Probably more. They've turned American soldiers into assets to be cashed in." Erin reached for the first folder. The face inside stared back at her, smiling from a podium. A man she vaguely remembered from briefing packets overseas. A clean, respectable figure. Someone who spoke of honor and sacrifice in front of cameras, while feeding coordinates to enemies behind closed doors. Her jaw tightened. "How many?" Camus answered. His voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the anger beneath it. "Enough to call it systemic. We're not talking about a single trader. We're talking about a business, an industry built on betrayal." Hayes's hand tapped the table once. "And that's where you come in. These people have money, power, political shields, but they all share one weakness. They believe they're untouchable. They don't see you coming." Erin's throat tightened, but her voice stayed level. "You want me to kill them?" The silence that followed was brief, but it carried weight. "Broke it? Some of them, yes. Others we expose. Cut their influence, destroy their networks. But the ones whose hands are red, the ones who made money on our blood, they don't get trials, they get precision." Erin closed the folder. She felt the paper like a weight in her hands. It was easy to say the word targets, easier to reduce people to dossiers, but she knew what it really meant. Faces, breathing men and women, people with families, routines, lives, and she would be the one to erase them. She forced herself to meet Hayes's eyes. And if we fail, then nothing changes, he said simply. The network keeps growing. More soldiers die. More families get folded flags and lies. If we fail, it means we never tried. Sarah spread another folder open, showing financial trails and encrypted messages. This isn't revenge, it's structural. Every name removed weakens the chain. Every cut we make saves lives down the line. Erin listened, but inside her mind drifted back to David, to the valley, to the moment everything broke. She remembered the helplessness of watching her team die while she lay hidden, powerless to intervene. She remembered the betrayal, the certainty that someone inside had fed their mission details to the enemy. And now the faces were in front of her, people who had profited from that betrayal, people who had turned her grief into numbers in an offshore account. Her hands curled into fists on the table. She understood now why Hayes had brought her, why his voice carried the edge it did, why Sarah's eyes burned with quiet fury, why Camus stood taller, like a man who had waited too long for justice. Because this wasn't just a mission, it was a reckoning. Hayes laid out the structure. You'll have full operational support, logistics, transport, intelligence, no bureaucratic oversight. This is a ghost operation, unofficial, invisible, and it stays that way. No one above us will claim it, and no one will save us if it burns. Leaned closer to her. But you'll never be alone again, not like the valley. We move together, always. Erin's eyes flicked to him. She wanted to believe him. But the memory of David's last stand lingered. She knew promises could shatter in the fire of reality. Still, she nodded once. Hayes pulled a final folder from the briefcase and slid it toward her. This is your first assignment. Low risk. A test of readiness. Erin opened it. The photograph was different from the polished faces of officials. This man was lower level. A contractor, logistics coordinator, mid-40s, plain, forgettable. But the dossier spelled it out. He had been the one moving intelligence from bases to contractors overseas. His leaks had directly led to the ambush in the valley. Erin's breath caught. The blood roared in her ears. This wasn't just a test. This was personal. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. He was the one. Hayes inclined his head. Yes, we traced it back. His data packets, his signatures, he sold you, sold David, sold all of them. The flame inside her surged. For years she had wondered who. For years the question had been an open wound. And now here he was, sitting in a folder on a table, living his life as if nothing had happened. Her jaw set. When? Soon, Hayes said. We move at your pace. But know this, every day he's alive, he's moving more data. More soldiers are at risk. Erin closed the folder. Her pulse had steadied, but her chest burned with something deeper. This was no longer theoretical, no longer strategy. It was flesh and blood. And she knew with absolute clarity that there was no turning back. Hayes's gaze lingered on her. I need to know you're ready. She looked up, meeting his eyes without flinching. I've been ready for 3 years. The words surprised her even as she said them, but they were true. She had lived in silence long enough. The ghosts had waited long enough. Hayes gave a single, sharp nod. The others leaned back, the tension in the room easing slightly. But for Erin, it had only just begun. Because now the mission wasn't abstract. It wasn't about systemic betrayal or faceless corruption. It was about a man with a name, a face, and blood on his hands. And tomorrow, she would become herself again. Not the clerk, not the ghost, but the sniper who never missed. How do you raise a rifle again when the last time you fired it, everyone you loved was dying around you? There was quiet, no chatter, no wasted movement, just the muted rhythm of preparation, the kind of silence only professionals carried into the hours before a mission. Erin sat at the table, weapon laid out in pieces before her. An M110 semi-automatic sniper system, sleeker than her old M24, more efficient, more precise, but in her hands it felt both foreign and familiar. Her fingers moved automatically, inspecting, oiling, assembling. Each click, each twist of metal was muscle memory reawakening. She thought she had buried this ritual, left it in the valley along with the people she loved. But now, piece by piece, she was putting herself back together. Leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her. He hadn't said a word in 10 minutes, and he didn't need to. His eyes told her everything. He was measuring her, the way he had always done before they stepped into fire. "You're breathing too fast," he said finally. Erin glanced at him, then exhaled slowly. He was right. She hadn't realized it, but her chest had been tight the entire time. She forced herself to slow, to remember. In, out, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. "Better," said softly. "You'll find it again." Sarah was across the room, headphones on, scanning comms. Her voice cut through the quiet. "Target's schedule confirmed. He'll be at the site between 1830 and 1900. Usual habits, complacent. No signs he suspects surveillance." Camus was checking medical gear, his movement steady. "He won't even know she's there. Clean, quiet, that's the point." Erin wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe it would be as simple as pulling a trigger, but she knew better. The bullet was the easy part. Living with it afterward, that was harder. When the briefing ended, walked with her outside. The air was sharp, clean. Mountains in the distance caught the last light of day. For a moment they just stood there, the silence between them deeper than words. "You don't have to carry it all alone," said finally. Erin kept her eyes on the horizon. "Don't I?" "You think you're the only one with ghosts." His voice was low, steady. "We all carry them. The difference is what we do with them." She didn't answer, couldn't, because she knew tonight would decide that for her. The drive to the site was uneventful. 2 vehicles staggered, Sarah in one running comms, Camus in the other on standby. With Erin, his presence a quiet anchor. They parked miles out, moving on foot through tree line and ridges. By the time Erin lay prone on the hillside, dusk had settled in. The world below was bathed in muted colors, gray buildings, cars scattered across a lot, the glow of lights beginning to flicker on. Her scope swept the area. The crosshairs moved like an old rhythm, cataloging angles, wind. She adjusted dials, checked distances, recalculated. Her breathing steadied. Her hands stopped trembling. For the first time in 3 years, she felt her body remember what it was built to do. "Target will arrive in 5, Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. Calm, clinical. Erin swallowed. Her finger rested lightly against the trigger guard. She saw him before she expected to. A plain sedan pulling up, a man stepping out, same face as the dossier, same posture, the contractor, the one who had sold her team. He looked ordinary, forgettable, the kind of man who blended into crowds, who went home to dinners and television, who shook hands and smiled. But to Erin, he wasn't ordinary. He was the reason David was dead, the reason she had woken up for 3 years in silence, the reason she had buried herself alive. Her scope locked on his chest. She could end it in a breath. But her finger froze. The weight of 3 years pressed down on her. The silence, the guilt, the questions. Could one bullet balance it? Could precision bring back everything that betrayal had taken? His voice was quiet in her ear. "Breathe. Don't think about who he is. Think about what he did." Her chest tightened. She adjusted slightly, her scope centering on the target's head now. One flicker of pressure and justice would be done. The man laughed at something on his phone, oblivious, unaware. Erin closed her eyes for a second, saw David again, saw the valley, the fire, the betrayal. She opened them, her breath slowed. In, her finger tightened. Out, the trigger broke. The crack of the rifle echoed across the hillside, swallowed quickly by distance. Through her scope she saw the man crumple. No sound, no warning, just gone. Her chest heaved, her ears rang. The silence after the shot was louder than the shot itself. "Target down," Sarah's voice confirmed. Steady, professional. Aaron didn't move, didn't breathe. She stared through the scope at the still body, the red pooling around it, the phone lying inches away. She had killed before, many times, but this was different. This was the first time since the valley, the first time since David. Her fingers slipped from the trigger, her hands shaking now. She rolled onto her back, staring up at the darkening sky. Crouched beside her, he didn't say congratulations, he didn't say good job, he just put a hand on her shoulder, solid, steady. Her breath came ragged. For a moment she thought she might break. The flood of grief and rage and relief pressed so hard it nearly tore her apart. But then slowly her breathing steadied again. She turned her head, meeting eyes. "It's not enough," she whispered. "No," he agreed softly. "It never is, but it's a start." They exfiltrated clean. No alarms, no witnesses. By the time the contractor's body was discovered, Erin and her team were gone, ghosts once more. Back at she sat alone, cleaning her rifle again. The motions were calm, methodical, but inside something had shifted. She had thought pulling the trigger would bring closure, that killing the man responsible for the ambush would lift the weight from her chest, but it hadn't. If anything, it had only sharpened it. Because was right, it wasn't enough. There were more names, more faces, more men and women who had turned soldiers' lives into currency. And now, for the first time in 3 years, Erin knew exactly who she was again. She wasn't a clerk, she wasn't a ghost, she was the Deadeye they had tried to bury. And the war had only just begun. What happens when justice finally has a face? 2 weeks after her first shot, Erin stood in another. The maps on the wall were bigger now, the red lines sharper, the photographs clearer. They weren't chasing contractors anymore. They were climbing the ladder. Hayes tapped a dossier on the table. Colonel Preston Hale, Pentagon liaison, 25 years of service, medals, public appearances. The kind of man who shakes hands with generals while quietly selling intel to contractors who fund enemy cells. He signed off on transfers that led to 3 compromised teams. He buried every investigation that came close. Erin stared at the photo. A man in uniform, smiling, polished. The kind of smile that could charm a crowd, calm a press briefing, convince families that their loved ones had died honorably. She wondered how many of those families would ever know the truth. "Where?" asked. Hayes pointed to a map. "Tomorrow, a gala. Defense contractors, senators, officials. He'll be the guest of honor, public, surrounded by cameras. We won't have another chance like this for months." Sarah frowned. Too exposed, too many eyes. Anything goes wrong, it burns everything. "That's why it has to be clean," Hayes said. He turned his gaze to Erin. "That's why it has to be you." The room went quiet. Everyone looked at her. Erin's stomach tightened. She had pulled the trigger once. It had been personal, quiet, hidden. This would be different. This would be public, the kind of shot that didn't just end one life but sent a message. Her hand brushed against the lighter in her pocket. David's lighter. The flame flickered in her mind, steady and fragile. She nodded once. "I'll take it." The plan was simple in design, brutal in execution. She would set up in a building across from the gala, disguised as empty office space. Sarah would manage surveillance, feeding her timing and windows, would cover her approach, and Camus would be standby, medical and contingency. Hayes coordinated. By dawn, they were moving. The city was alive that night, lights buzzing, traffic flowing, people laughing in restaurants. Ordinary life. None of them had any idea of the shadow war happening just blocks away. Erin lay prone in the abandoned office, scope trained on the glittering windows of the gala hall across the street. She could see the crowd inside, men in suits, women in gowns, crystal glasses flashing under chandeliers. And there near the stage, Colonel Hale, smiling, toasting, the image of respectability. Her crosshairs rested on him, steady as her breath. Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. Window opens in 30. He's moving toward the podium. Aaron inhaled, slow, exhaled, slower. The scope became her world. Then she froze. A woman stepped into frame, mid-30s, civilian dress. Her hand touched Hale's arm casually, familiarly. She laughed at something he said, and Aaron saw it, the shape of her smile, the curve of her shoulders. A wife. Her chest tightened. She adjusted slightly, catching more of the scene. Two children near the edge of the crowd, dressed neatly, watching their father. Her finger hovered over the trigger. For a second, she wasn't in the office anymore. She was back in the valley, back in the dirt, in the blood, watching David fall. Except now the faces around him weren't her team, they were Hale's family. Innocent, unaware. Her breath caught. His voice cut through her earpiece. Calm, firm, focus. Her hand shook, just slightly, enough to feel it. Sarah's voice. 15-second, he's stepping up. This is the shot. Aaron closed her eyes. One shot, one trigger pull, that was all it would take. But when she opened them again, she didn't see Hale. She saw his children. She saw the ripple of what came after. She saw the difference between vengeance and justice. Her finger eased off the trigger. Negative, she whispered. Too many civilians. The silence on comms was instant, heavy. Sarah's voice sharp. We don't get another chance. Negative, Aaron repeated, harder now. He dies tonight, it's not justice, it's theater, and they'll bury it before it even breathes. Hayes's voice cut in. Then what's your play? Aaron exhaled, forcing her pulse steady. Expose him, strip his shield. Let the world see what he really is before we erase him. A pause, then Hayes's voice again, measured. Then move. The rest unfolded fast. Sarah rerouted surveillance feeds, breached a service entrance. Camus provided cover from the street, and Aaron, abandoning her perch, moved into the building itself. She wasn't a ghost behind a rifle anymore. She was walking straight into the light. She slipped into the gala through the service corridor, her badge forged, her posture confident. No one stopped her. The uniform of belonging was often just belief. When she reached the edge of the main hall, she moved like she belonged, like she was supposed to be there. Her hand slid the flash drive into the AV system, her heart pounding. Seconds later, the screens behind the podium flickered. Not slides of contracts, not patriotic imagery, but files, documents, transfers, Hale's signature, bank accounts. Every betrayal laid bare in front of the entire hall. The crowd gasped. Murmurs turned into shouts. Reporters raised cameras. Phones filmed. The truth spread faster than security could react. Hale froze on stage, his polished smile cracking into panic. He knew what this meant. Aaron stood in the shadows of the hall, watching him. For a moment her hand brushed the pistol under her jacket. She could end it here. One bullet, one final stroke. But she didn't, not yet. Instead, she watched as Hale was swallowed by his own lies, exposed not by a rifle shot, but by the truth he had buried. Security swarmed, the crowd fractured, and in the chaos Aaron slipped away, her team pulling her back into the night. By the time the news broke, they were already gone. Back in the atmosphere was electric. Sarah's eyes burned with adrenaline, allowed himself a small grin. Camus shook his head in disbelief. You realize what you just did, he said. You turned a ghost mission into a public reckoning. Aaron sat quietly, David's lighter in her hand. She flipped it open, watched the flame for a second, then closed it. It wasn't about him, she said softly. It was about them, about every family that deserved to know the truth, about every soldier who never got the chance to see justice. Hayes studied her for a long moment. You had the shot, you didn't take it. Aaron met his gaze steady. Because justice isn't a bullet, not always. The room fell silent, not because they disagreed, but because they understood. The mission wasn't over. It would never truly be over. There would be more names, more faces, more shadows to fight, but something had shifted. Erin wasn't just a weapon anymore. She wasn't just vengeance wrapped in precision. She was a choice, a reminder that even in the darkest corridors of betrayal, there was still a line between justice and rage. She stood, pulling her bag over her shoulder. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that, she walked into the night.